Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Naruto light novel review. This one is going to be for this book, which is Naruto's story, Uzumaki Naruto and the Spiral Destiny. So, for those of you wondering what exactly this is the third of a trilogy of light novels. You might know it as the sort of Retsuden kind of trilogy. We of course started off with the first book of this kind of trilogy, which was Kakashi's story, of course. The second one, which you're probably super familiar with, if you keep up with Naruto and Boruto, is Sasuke's story, the Uchiha and the Heavenly Stardust. Well, the idea is actually that these three books are a trilogy together. But interestingly, in terms of other adaptations, they only decided to do the middle book for some reason. They did a manga adaptation of this, they did this in the anime, and basically, for the most part, in both of those adaptations, more or less ignored the events from the first book, the Kakashi book, and the third book, the Naruto book. So, this is an interesting one here, finally getting a chance to read this one. Especially this one feels especially forgotten. At least there were slight references to the Kakashi stuff in the other adaptations, because they had to do some of it. But they skipped over so much, and that Kakashi book is definitely worth reading if you're a fan of his character. He gets some nice scenes in this book as well. But it's absolutely the Kakashi book where he gets to shine doing a lot of the setup stuff. This book is also where the story actually, I think, properly comes together across the entire trilogy. Because you find out that the reason Kakashi is on his mission, the reason Sasuke goes on his mission in the second book is because Naruto is sick. He has this chakra illness that the Sage of the Six Paths also had. If you're familiar with the events of the Sasuke novel, you of course know that it's all about getting the ultra particles, and Sasuke has to go through the events of that plot to get his hands on those ultra particles, which are meant to cure Naruto like they cured the Sage of the Six Paths. And for the most part in those adaptations, they treat it as Sasuke was successful, so, you know, Naruto is cured, and we don't really cover Naruto, the effects of Naruto. So that's why this book is actually quite important, to highlight, like, telling you a little bit of the backstory of, like, when did Naruto first find out that he was sick? How did he deal with that? What was he doing while the missions were going on to help him? Because he still has to be Hokage. And how, like, public or not public was he with this illness? And then, was it as simple as ultra particles solution? And the answer is no, it wasn't that simple. There is a whole extra section here. This is actually the longest of these books. This is about, like, was it just under 220 pages? Oh no, I think it's exactly 220 pages. Yeah, the book ends on page 220. So this is probably a good, like, 40-50 pages longer than the other two books. Because there's quite a bit of setup to do to establish, okay, this is the whole Naruto setup. But then, to continue on from where the Sasuke novel left off, and that, like, oh yeah, research needed to be done on the ultra particles before they actually gave them to Naruto, but there's a whole other kind of plot that happens over the course of this book. So overall, I would say I was pretty happy with this. My general opinions are that I think the characterization of Naruto, of course Orochimaru's in this one as well, Sasuke is in this one, Sakura's in here for a little bit, Kakashi gets a bit of a chance to shine, and you get to see a lot of different characters. By the end of the book, you have, like, most of the notable kind of characters that Naruto is friends with having some involvement or another. Like, Shikamaru gets his moment, Ino gets a moment, Choji gets a bit of a moment, you know, Yamato's even here for a little bit. You introduce quite a few characters here, and it actually helps that there's not too many, like, extra new characters. Like, I'm pretty sure it's just, like, 2 brand new characters for this book, and one of them is a bit of a kind of meh villain, but the other character, Amano Chihire, this scientist, female scientist character, she's actually really interesting because she gets to interact with Naruto throughout a lot of this book, and I think they do some good character work with her. I would say if there's a slight weakness to this book, it's that when the plot begins to reach the end, it becomes a little convoluted. What they need the plot to do to it's clever, but what is ultimately required at the end, because of the cleverness of the mystery and figuring out the whole ultra particle situation, it just requires some wild events to happen that just feels like it stretches the quote-unquote believability of Naruto to a certain extent. Mainly just because of the characters involved in performing these jutsus, what the almost just the geometry of the situation requires to happen. It just feels a little absurd when I typically am not someone who calls out stuff in like anime and especially Naruto all that much, because I'm aware crazy stuff can happen. But this just felt a little bit like, is there not a little bit of a better way you could do that? Just to make it a bit more believable. Like the numbers just got a bit absurd with what ends up actually happening here. So let's jump into this ultimately. Again, it is a light novel, so there's no images apart from basically the cover and then the lineup of characters involved in the book, which is kind of interesting. So you can see here they have images of most of the main cast of kind of Boruto, Naruto, mainly focused on the adult characters here. You know, you see a little bit of Sarada, a little bit of Boruto, a little bit of Mitsuki, but for the most part they're not hugely important within the book, so that's the kind of main thing to say there. You know, you have a little page for our main characters, but that's basically all of the visuals that you get over the course of this book. The focus then is just, you know, it is text-based light novel, of course. I know some people often get confused by that if they're not familiar with the light novels, but that is the idea of them. The reason it's a light novel and not an actual novel is just that it's a little bit snappier with the pacing and how it's written. It's not written to be particularly complicated and spend too much time on each scene, and you just like it sort of is a light novel that reads with the kind of flow of a manga type thing. It's sort of like the idea of a light novel, as of course we're all familiar with now. What actually happens in the book? So because of the unusual way they're telling the story here in terms of like the connection between the three books, where we obviously start off with Kakashi on his mission because he was tasked to go there to help investigate what is needed with the ultra particles. Then Sasuke is sent on his mission as well, and we're all talking about Redaku here is the location, of course. You get a little bit of the crossover in the fact that like Sasuke's mission is happening at roughly the same time as Kakashi's mission, but Kakashi starts his mission first. This book goes ahead of that and actually goes back and tells us like this was the first time Naruto discovered he had this illness. We actually start off with a prologue chapter of Naruto attending this kind of important kind of like meeting event where he has to make an appearance as the Hokage. And it all goes really well, but then you suddenly realize the chapter is basically being told from the perspective of an assassin trying to kill Naruto. And it's this guy who has a Kekkei Genkai, that means he has particularly strong shadow clones. So it's 3 notable shadow clones who can all do the kind of Naruto thing of like when they, you know, pop, the memories go back to the original. And we basically get the idea of like, oh, like, he thinks it's going to be an easy task here because he's heard rumors that Naruto is not as strong as he used to be, and there doesn't seem to be security around him. But then you just get the kind of the quick fire thing of sort of like clone A gets taken out. It's Kakashi. Why is Kakashi guarding Naruto? That's a bit crazy because Naruto's theoretically still strong even if he's kind of weakened. So that's like, oh wow. The second one gets taken out shortly after that. It's Sakura. She's here as well, and the assassin's just beginning to freak out at this point. Then the third one gets taken out by Sasuke, and suddenly it's just a like, oh no, I don't know if I have a chance here. So the actual real guy, not Shadow Clone, is like, well, my plan was to ultimately take him out with this, what's it called, like a photon gun type thing, which basically fires a laser with the idea that it like almost like lights the body on fire. And it's so high, like, density heat that it will just, like, immediately, like, ignite the body. And if it catches enough, they kind of say, like, spontaneous combustion will happen here. So even a glancing blow from this could be deadly. So it kind of speaks to the technology involved here. And it's important to realize that there is technology involved here because it speaks to who hired this assassin. What is the underlying plot of this book. But the assassins go down. It seems like Naruto is able to actually take out the real guy once that's kind of like dealt with. But then it gets revealed that it was actually Shikamaru transformed into Naruto. And then they go back and they're like, actual Naruto is tied up because his friends had to tie him up to prevent the weakened Naruto from being out in public and trying to do his role. That's how kind of difficult it is for him to kind of handle doing these roles without having the full sort of scope of his power. We then go back to sort of establish, okay, when was it when these kind of moments were specifically happening? When did he actually begin to sort of like feel the effects of this kind of happening for the first time? And it's just this one moment where Shikamaru is just like, hey, if you could make another shadow clone, that would be great, and we could do this other thing that we need to do. And he makes the shadow clone, and all of a sudden, it's almost as if he has like a heart attack. It's just this like shoot of pain kind of through his body that keeps happening. And this is obviously meant to be an indication that from the other books we know what the illness is already is a chakra illness that affects like his chakra system, which has already basically been told to us that the reason that this is happening, and they double down on that in this book, is because he has a tail beast inside of him. Because he has Kurama inside of him, it is affecting his chakra paths after all of this time, and this is the same thing that happened to the Sage of the Six Paths. So that's what's happening here. Sakura explains a little bit more medically what's actually kind of happening here is that his chakra paths are closing. Much later on in the book, you get the idea that the reason that this is happening is because his body is beginning to consider the tail beast chakra that's in his system to be a foreign body. So his chakra paths are closing so that it doesn't allow the tail beast chakra to flow. But it's because the tail beast is part of him, it kind of has to flow. It's actually just completely beginning to gradually close all of his chakra paths. And so when he tries to do jutsu, it's of course putting pressure through it. And the risk here is that if it actually fully closes, all of his chakra paths closed, there'll be no way to cure him. So there's a bit of a deadline on this of like, he needs the ultra particles in a certain amount of time before it's just completely too late. Now, of course, going into the book, you know Sasuke gets the ultra particles. But at the end of that book, they never just full on said that Naruto was just straight up given them. There was research that they wanted to do into them. I guess in case, you know, more if they're a way to make more of them, just in case something like this happens again. And like, in a way, if it's affecting Naruto, why won't it affect like some of the other Jinchuriki out there? That's sort of like the question that they're kind of playing with throughout this. But they quickly cover that. Then there's a second incident where he's doing some training with Boruto, and he goes to do an Earth style jutsu, and again it sort of happens again. And it's just kind of covering sort of like how Naruto handles this kind of like illness. He's still doing his job as Hokage, but he sort of questions in his mind of like, can I be Hokage if I don't have my power? And obviously by the end of the book, like the ultimate kind of path of this is that he realizes people still want him to be Hokage, even if he doesn't have his power. It's just his personality in a way. He has earned the right to be Hokage, even if his power level has dropped. And it's sort of, I suppose it's meant to be a little bit of a similar thing. I think they played on this with Kakashi in one of the previous books. I think it was the first Kakashi light novel that they put out, where he kind of questioned, like, can I be Hokage when I don't have, like, the full scope of the power that people know me for, like having the Sharingan, not having it anymore, can I still do it? And the answer, of course, is yes. Because in a way, in that leadership position, especially when you're not in a time of absolute like focus on war, which is basically the eras of the 6th and 7th Hokage, is that it's building up in a time of peace for the most part. The power level of your Hokage is not necessarily the most important thing. And it's kind of Naruto, over the course of the book, kind of coming to realize that. It's not a particularly major point, because a couple of people mentioned, like, are you going to step down as Hokage? But ultimately it's like, no, it's never really at a question if he is going to do that or not. It's just, when it begins to happen and he realizes he actually has this illness, it is something he questions within himself, but he's assured by like everyone else around him, and through his interactions with other characters, he comes to realize that look, that's a kind of silly thought process. This is the correct kind of way to handle things ultimately. So that's all kind of fine as we kind of establish what's happening here. The other characters are brought up to speed. Naruto does choose not to tell his family, but I think by the end of the book it's sort of implied that like Hinata basically knows and has figured it out already. She doesn't want to sort of like add to the worry of the situation by like calling Naruto out, because I think she knows that like it's sort of being handled. They're doing what they can to help him, and so Hinata tries to stay calm over the whole situation, and kind of there's a slight implication that Boruto's maybe aware something is happening as well, but fundamentally that's not particularly like the focus of the book, you know, that he does that or that he doesn't do that. It's a little bit of a weird situation, but I think Hinata is actually written, I think, quite well here to be just supportive of Naruto kind of throughout this. But the plot actually kicks off. Is like, why is it Orochimaru included here? So basically we get to the idea of like Naruto one day like returns home and Orochimaru is there. And it's actually a really fun scene because the characterization of Orochimaru is also very well done in this book, where you get to see all the different sort of like angles of him, because a lot of people think like, oh, why did they quote unquote redeem Orochimaru? Why is he just allowed to exist in the village with just being like over, like just having like Yamato kind of be someone to kind of look over what he's doing? And you see it's because for the most part he is actually fine just doing his research and he's not really causing any problems. He is Mitsuki's parent and he actually is invested in Mitsuki, of course, as we know. But we see that he was actually like playing with Himawari and he was drawing pictures for her, and Himawari actually seems to really like Orochimaru and is not at all disturbed by the whole snake neck thing that he can do. And Naruto's just weirded out because I'm like, why are you here? And he's also kind of like, wait, Hinata, like, are you not weirded out by the fact that like he's in the house? What's going on here? And she's just like, well, he came over and I technically like know him a little bit because he's basically one of the moms, effectively, like in terms of the parents and stuff like that. So like we were kind of catching up a little bit on that. And there's a moment later on in the book where he has sort of a little bit of a similar moment with Ino, just highlighting that like he's also a fellow parent of like the academy kids as well, and just him interacting with like the other characters. It's an interesting contrast between, at one point in the series, this was the main villain, but now he's just this kind of helpful scientist with an edge, but he's also like this actual like caring parent. So it's interesting. But then in the action moments, you see that when he's involved on like a mission, basically working with the other characters, he still has the tendency to, let's kill these people instead of let's get in there, if we have to, we'll knock people out. But no, he's like, I want to kill people. You know, he ultimately doesn't end up, I think, killing people, even though he attempts to do it once or twice in the book. He uses, like, debilitating poison to take people out. He does knock people out. You know, I think it's a reasonable take on the character to highlight that he's just in this position now where his extreme ambitions are gone, and he's just sort of, like, comfortable being this, like, weird researcher kind of character and following kind of like Mitsuki's path, which I think is quite interesting over the course of the book, that he's purposely willing to help people. It's just he is never going to be like a hero. Like you're never going to send him as the lead guy out on one of your missions. He has to be overseen by the other characters, but he's not an absolute menace anymore, is sort of like the idea with him. So effectively what we get here is this is where we get like the introduction of like Orochimaru is kind of like, oh yeah, I'll help you out, but you have to help me out. So he wants Naruto to test this new device that he's created. So this is this pair of goggles that effectively he has managed to engineer to effectively kind of like take effectively temporarily the power of someone's ocular jutsu and allow someone else to use it through these goggles. So this is what we get here, is that like the reason he's interacting with Hinata is to get sort of Hinata's power of the Byakugan. Now, they don't particularly explain the whole idea of how exactly this works, where like, okay, so Naruto now has these goggles which allow him to quote-unquote use the Byakugan, but it only works while Hinata doesn't use her Byakugan. Now, I think the implication is just that if like Hinata wanted to use her Byakugan, she could. It would just cut off the connection to the device. They never really explain how exactly it works. Though, interestingly, they do bring up, based on the villain from the second book, it's related to his powers. What's his name again? Let me just get it up here. His name is Zansul. So he's the guy with the glass eyes that they just don't explain in book 2. Like, what exactly is the situation here? Why does he have glass eyes? How can he see? So Orochimaru explains that he went to Rediku once and he figured out something about this particular kind of like jutsu technology. And that's kind of what's happening in the goggles, effectively, is that there's these glass eyes in the goggles. And I think there's some sort of a chakra holding type thing going on here. So that's how like the power of the ocular jutsu was able to go into it. Again, they're a little bit like hand wavy about the exact details about what happens, but I don't think we'll be seeing too much of this anyway. So a lot of this book is about like a depowered Naruto having to assist this researcher. I'll get to the whole how he meets the researcher kind of situation in a second. With her studies into chakra, using the power of this Byakugan, which he does have to train to use. Initially, when he first turns it on, he is nearly like literally floored by the amount of like information coming into his brain. As someone who's never used Byakugan before, all of a sudden he basically turns on the like omni-vision type thing that Byakugan actually is, and he doesn't know how to process all this information, every angle coming at him at once, and he has to train to do it, which he ultimately does. And this is where Hinata helps, in that she's kind of like, I'm a little bit kind of like you when it comes to sort of like jutsu and learning it kind of properly, where it's a bit more instinctual, so I almost can't really explain to you myself how exactly I went about training with the Byakugan. Because like Naruto explains, like when he does jutsu, it's like, I went like bam, and then pow, and then wah, and it just happened. And Hinata does a little bit of that. So she's kind of like, actually, I will give you one of my kind of like treasured items here. I will give you like Neji's journal. He always wrote down when he was doing his training with the Byakugan what was going on here. So there's a nice little moment between kind of husband and wife here where they kind of reflect on Neji. She gives Naruto this journal, and this helps Naruto to focus in on things as he goes through, like, this is how I did my training with my teammates, and like 10-10 helped me to train here, with the amount of like ninja weaponry she had. It was good training for the kind of omnidirectional kind of stuff, as well as the whole like sensing different birds, how many are there out there. All those little references kind of begin to come out here as he begins to get a hang of this. And while he's testing it, he goes up on top of the Hokage stone monument and looks out over the village with the Byakugan and sees that like there's this chakra leaking out of this area. So he goes over there, finds a secret area, and in there, this is where he meets the new character here, the researcher, Chihare, which is Chihare, who is a scholar at the Kengakuin International Research Institute. So we see that she's doing her own kind of secret research here into chakra. Now, it's a really in-depth exploration of chakra that's actually kind of talked about in this book, which is sort of like, she brings up these very broad questions that Naruto almost doesn't know what to do with, which is like, chakra is an incredible substance, don't you think? Because it can transform into almost anything. It could transform into water, fire, earth, wind, and so on. Some people could turn it into lava. Rubber gets mentioned. What's been referenced quite heavily in these books up to now is that Earth-style users can even transform it further into like specific gemstones or glass. That means it is this incredibly versatile substance that if we can learn to kind of harness it from a scientific point of view, can we turn chakra into anything we want? And it has so many uses in this way. We could use it for the medical field. We could turn it into theoretically anything, and sort of it opens up the door to everything being possible. And so Naruto is kind of like, well, this is going to help me test out my Byakugan thing, and she needs more detailed sort of like analysis kind of stuff going on, and that like be able to see the chakra with the Byakugan is really helpful. They sort of established that like her as a non chakra user would have a very hard time just immediately adapting to it. So you end up with this weird situation where Naruto ends up just helping this random researcher with this as a way to just help with what's going on overall. Now, in the background, of course, the missions are happening. Kakashi gets sent out for the first book to happen. Sasuke gets sent out for the second book to happen. And this is all happening. We find out Naruto's still having these kind of spasms, and it's kind of getting worse and worse. And you find out that as it gets worse and worse, the spasms actually begin to go away, because it highlights that his chakra's system is closing down so much that the spasms, which are from his chakra like moving, trying to be forced through, is beginning to slow down. So this is actually a bad sign that this is happening, even though he's not in the excruciating sort of like pain anymore. So that's all kind of really cool. Eventually there's an attack on the lab by drones. So again, kind of high technology assassination type thing going on here. There's a kind of cool action sequence at this point where Naruto has to escape on a invention that Chihire has, which is basically the invention of like a motorized bicycle type thing. Is it quite a motorbike? I think it ultimately has to be based on what happens at the end of the book. It's like a prototype for a motorbike, and Naruto drives them out, and they just barely manage to kind of like survive this attack. But in the meantime, her lab has been destroyed. There needs to be a relocation. So what ends up happening is that Chihire goes to Orochimaru's lab because he's actually interested in what she's making, and he lets her kind of hang out there at the lab. So that's all sort of like fantastic, and you're kind of wondering the whole time, what's actually happening here? So you get kind of Chihire's backstory, which is sort of the idea that she's part of this research institute, but she prefers to work alone. And she talks about how some of her research, some of the things she wanted to study, because she's primarily actually an astrophysicist. She wanted to research this interesting kind of like celestial object that would really quickly fly by the planet at certain points. But no one would believe her that it actually was a thing that exists. And this is going to come back quite heavily because it's like the key to the book ultimately. But because of this, she just decided, you know what, I'm going to leave this and do my own research here on this chakra stuff in secret. But this is where like the main plot begins to come out, and it's kind of maybe one of the slightly weaker elements of the book. The villain of the book ends up being what's his name, Kanhen Fure, Furieh, who's the administrative director at the Kengakuin International Research Institute. And effectively the idea here is that he is trying to hijack her research, because his plot and sort of what we're dealing with here is ultimately we're getting into a bit of the control the energy of the world and you are dominant effectively. Because at the start, the first initial scene is about Konoha negotiating a deal for natural gas with a place that it helped in the past, and it just highlights that the control of natural resources is super important, but that theoretically, Chihire's invention would make it so that if it works the way it's expected to, any nation can use this technology to effectively turn chakra into like natural gas or something like that. And it would open up the kind of like energy market in that way. So the idea ultimately is that the villain here is the kind of greedy kind of administrator trying to steal the research for himself. There's also a sense of like the ultra particles at this point come into play. So Sasuke has them. They actually send the ultra particles to the actual research institute to be researched, and it eventually gets into the hands of Chihire, but after the other guys have dealt with it. And the idea ultimately is that he wants to replicate ultra particles to sort of like control the world, kind of through, using it in combination with everything to, control natural resources, and that will be a, big kind of plan for kind of just domination and like absolute kind of raw success. So effectively, in the middle of all of this, we get the kind of this is like roughly the 3/4 way point of the book. There is the kind of confrontation. It's like Orochimaru, Naruto, and Chihire encounter the villain guy, Fure, and all his kind of like robots and kind of the guys he has working for him. There's a big kind of fight that ends up going down. The drones are involved, I think, again. And basically what happens at the end of this is that the batch of ultra particles gets, destroyed in this. They stop Fure from doing what he wants to do, but in the process, the ultra particles are destroyed. Now, the guy doesn't end up getting killed. Naruto, it's specifically noted as being a big Naruto moment that, of course, he would sacrifice something that would like save his own kind of like powers to help effectively the villain of the piece. Of course he did that. So then the pressure is on. What do we do now? Is Naruto just unable to be cured with the ultra particles gone? But then you remember from the previous book, there were 2 batches of ultra particles. There was one that was said to had like fallen to Earth, and then the one that was like out there in the infinite or something like that. And so they figure out that like, oh yeah, because the legend was that what happened was that the Sage of the Six Paths split a meteorite in 2. And that's where the ultra particles came from. So half of it's on Earth, and they figure out that half of it is orbiting Earth. That's why they say it's like infinite, because it's always just around Earth, but it's not on Earth. And this is the celestial object that Chihire had discovered when she was younger and was refused to do research on. So they figure out that the half meteorite is actually what they need. This is where they can get the other ultra particles from. And this is sort of where the kind of craziness happens. So we obviously have this thing that is orbiting the planet. So effectively in near space. I don't think they say it's full on in space, but it's super like high up, in the atmosphere or whatever. They say it's like, I think it's literally listed as a number in the book. 660,000 feet high is how far they need to go to get this. And I think probably the most absurd part of this is just that Kakashi is like, oh yeah, I can do that. I can make an earth pillar that high. And it's like, what? Like, I know Kakashi's powerful. But can we stop for a second and be like, how high? 660,000 feet. What? And I looked it up. Like, Mount Everest is like 29,000 feet high. So this is 660,000 feet high. That's like 20 times larger. And it's effectively getting into kind of near space. And I'm like, what? And look, I get it. Naruto has certain powers that are this crazy level. Some of the Otsutsuki stuff that can happen. Some of the powers that Naruto and Sasuke had, the Rinnegan thing of like the planetary devastation jutsu, the fact that it basically creates a moon. Sure. But there's also just the kind of raw kind of physics aspect of like, I get it, they can manipulate Earth and do kind of crazy things with it. But seriously, a pillar, effectively a road, a track from the ground into the sky that is multiple lines long and is effectively done by one, later ends up being 4 characters to make this happen. But it still feels like this is a crazy thing to even be considering what we're actually going to do here. Um, but we'll get to that in a second. Characterization wise, we'll take a little bit of a step back here. Chihiro and Naruto, of course, have a lot of screen time together in this book. And what's interesting here is you basically get the idea that Chihiro is a loner. She specifically doesn't want to do a lot of research with other people. She doesn't even particularly enjoy being around other people. Now, they don't really make this a problem. They just highlight that she is not the most kind of like social character and just prefers to be by herself. And Naruto is understanding of this, of course. But he does kind of like talk about how, like, I love being around people. And you get a lot of internal dialogue from her as she's just kind of like, initially, like, she's kind of like, oh my god, I'm working with the Hokage. But then comes to realize that, like, oh yeah, he's actually just a really kind of normal person who just really, really values his friends. It's almost weird that this guy is like one of the most famous people in the world and he's like world leader. And he just starts telling her all these stories about, like, I had friends when I was younger, Kiba, Shikamaru, but outside of, like, while we were together at school, like, I basically had no one. And she has a bit of a moment where, like, she's like, you wouldn't understand it, everyone loves you, because you find out that basically Naruto's like 10 years older than her, give or take. So she was alive when Naruto was doing the stuff from, like, original Naruto Shippuden. But she was so young, she wouldn't have been familiar with the kind of that era for the Leaf Village where Naruto was an outcast. So him revealing that that was actually the case is kind of a bit of a eye-opening moment. They don't make it a huge moment here, just a little bit of a thing to highlight that, like, have some different perspectives here. Like, I was able to grow from that and become the Hokage. You can change as well if you want, but ultimately with the character, they just accept that she just prefers to work alone. She's a little bit more open to getting help from people, I guess, by the end of the book, but it's just a nice interaction as you see Naruto just interact with this character and just help her to kind of achieve her goals and what she actually wants, and just, in a way, giving her the respect to match her, like, intelligence and her ambitions. And that's kind of what ends up happening at the end. She's basically put into a position where she's just allowed to work on her own with whatever she wants. She's offered a leadership role to kind of like, kind of almost command the research institution, but she doesn't want it. She's just like, let me do whatever I want, don't hinder me, and that's cool. And I actually thought that was a nice way to do the character of just, like, there's no need to turn her around and suddenly have her change drastically and start, like, needing people and caring about people a lot if that's just the way that she is. It's not that she's mean or anything like that. She interacts perfectly fine with a lot of the other characters. It's just that she prefers to be alone in a lot of situations, which is perfectly fine. And it's cool because you see Naruto just getting the one to kind of course, dominate the situations here, talking, and just the way he talks about all of the people that are close to him. And there's a lot of noting here from characters of just, like, he is talking so casually about legendary figures like Sasuke, Sakura, the sixth Hokage, Kakashi. But yeah, they are his team, his friends. That it's just this kind of nice kind of moment to put into perspective everything that's happening. But anyway, the big sequence that we set up for at the end is this huge kind of convoluted thing that's actually quite complicated. They have multiple teams going out because they need a few things here. They need to interpret the rest of, like, the poem to find out the hand signs to unlock the second ultra particles. Because remember, the first ones required hand signs that had to be figured out using the map of heavens in the game in the second book. They have to do the same, but it's different here. So they have to kind of infiltrate the research institute, which, because they spared Fure, he's still in play at the end and not working for them. So it's just this kind of the way kind of things end up playing out. They need to infiltrate the research institution to get that. So they need to get the code to get into the computer system. Then, the Ino then needs to use mind transmission to relay that to Sai, who will be the one to actually do the seals. Because while Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura are going to go up on the motorbike thing, up the giant earth pillar into the high atmosphere to get the orbiting ultra particles when they go by, they won't have communication with anyone. So the idea is that Sai is going to fly one of his drawing bird things really, really high as well. He'll be at risk as well, but he'll be at the right altitude to where he can get the transmission from Ino and do the hand signs to unlock the seal on the thing to get them the ultra particles. Orochimaru is there to hack into the system when they eventually get the code. And it's just like a lot of the characters are involved here. Choji's there to help Shikamaru, and during that part of the mission, there's just like a little bit of everything kind of happening at this stage of the book. So there's a lot of fast cuts in the scenes as the action kind of takes place at the end. But yeah, the craziness of basically this motorcycle ride up this earth pillar is just wild to me. And I'm kind of like, I would almost say, like, is this the entire reason that they never bothered to animate this one? Is because how on earth do you animate that and have it look good? This prototype motorcycle, which they do improve on and stuff like that. And 3 characters on it going that high up. And yes, they explain a few of the things. It was like, okay, they need to be able to breathe. So Sakura gives them these kind of recently made things with using the technology that Chihiro has made that like uses the chakra kind of altering thing that will turn chakra into oxygen, and it will like pump it directly into them, but it's held in kind of loosely, and because Naruto's weakened, he's reliant on like Sasuke's kind of system to make this properly happen, because Sasuke has to supply chakra into this thing. There's a tease that, like, going up, they all know that if this doesn't go right, Sasuke is going to attempt to, like, destroy the container that the ultra particles are in to get them out. But what's been set up from the research across the book is that if someone interacts with ultra particles and they don't have the kind of chakra illness, it basically amplifies their chakra and will effectively like destroy their chakra system. So the idea is like this is part of like the plan as well for the Furei guy. It was like why he wanted to like basically clone the ultra particles is because he could control ninjas as well by like using this ultra particle thing to kind of overload them. And the same is true here. If Sasuke forces it open, he'll basically kill himself to get the ultra particles out. But he seems like he's willing to do that for Naruto. So yeah, they're heading up there. There's a lot of tension because they do establish that, look, as much as I've been making a light of it, they do establish that it's going to be an incredible challenge for Kakashi and Yamato working together to make this crazy earth pillar. Now, it's earth and wood. I think the idea is that Kakashi creates a solid earth pillar, and then Yamato wraps a kind of like spiral wood kind of pattern around it to give it more support. That's kind of why the whole Spiral Destiny title is in there. They make reasonable note of the fact that like the whirlpool design, the Uzumaki symbol that's in the Leaf Village symbol is a kind of whirlpool type design, of symbolically what that means, and that it's a strong structure and stuff like that. And they emphasize that here as well. And they immediately established, like, okay, they need to do some training first. They do it, the day comes. And it just feels a bit crazy that, like, okay, they're struggling, but they're still getting this earth pillar up to, like, 300,000 feet with relatively minimal problems. Now, it starts to rain, and it starts to put the mission at risk, because the earth style is obviously, begins to become kind of wet and stuff like that. So last minute, what happens is that Gaara and Kuretsuchi come in. So we have 2 Kage characters kind of like come in and shore up the Earth's defenses, and this solidifies it, gets it to as high as they need to. Everything comes down to the last minute, so it looks like Sasuke might have to sacrifice himself. But last minute, Naruto puts on the Byakugan goggles and realizes that the ultra particles are like opening. It's happened. It has worked. So he basically like pushes Sasuke back down to Earth. He goes back down with Sakura, and Naruto on his own gets the ultra particles. But what's happened is that the half meteorite that they were on has kind of exploded in the meantime, and so the village looks like it's going to get showered with meteorite debris, which is going to be bad. So this is where you realize that, like, okay, everyone is down there ready. All the notable ninja in the village are down below. They're each going to take some of this debris and take it out, but it's still not going to be enough. It's a lot of debris. And so then you get the big Naruto moment. He comes down full Kurama chakra mode, does the crazy thing where he does all the giant, like, barrage of Rasengans, and he takes out the rest of the debris. And so he's back. It's all kind of worked out in the end, and Naruto just kind of notes, the sacrifice that Sasuke was willing to make, that everyone is here, part of this mission to kind of help him get better again, and that this is why he is the Hokage. That people were willing to support him even at this kind of weak moments, but his strength is now back, and that's kind of nice. So there's not too much of a kind of epilogue to all of this in terms of wrapping up the kind of Rediku stuff and the politics and all that, so that other stuff that was going on. It's very much just like it ends on that note. The specific ending note is actually very specifically that it's Naruto kind of sharing a very nice moment with Sasuke, Sakura, and Kakashi. Them kind of sharing a drink together basically at the end. So nice moment to end it, to just highlight that, that's kind of what it was about. That we had our Naruto, Sasuke, Kakashi. Sakura was a decent part of the Sasuke book, of course. So they were all involved here to a certain degree, which is pretty nice. Things I might have skipped over a little bit. I mentioned earlier on that there's an Ino Orochimaru moment, because they're kind of like teamed up on the kind of final mission. And it's really awkward because Ino particularly doesn't really know what to do around Orochimaru, because she's not really interacted with him much. And so she's real nervous and is kind of making a couple of little mistakes, and he's just kind of like, come on, get your head in the game. And then when she finally opens up, she's just like, Mitsuki's a nice kid. And she just has kind of like mom talk with Orochimaru for a little bit. And he's just a little bit stunned because, like, okay, they're waiting around for their cue to activate on the mission. But he's a bit like, why are we doing this now? We're waiting for a key thing on this mission. But she's just like, well, while we're waiting here, we might as well have mom talk of just like, I don't see you at like some of the kind of meetings that we have amongst the parents. And then Orochimaru's just like, well, I attended the parent-teacher like meeting to discuss Mitsuki with I guess Shino or whatever, and it's just like, oh, so just a really awkward but interesting interaction that ended up happening there. Similarly, there's actually a quite interesting Hinata Sasuke moment, which is also quite interesting, where They specifically note that the two have not really ever interacted all that much. And it's from Sasuke's perspective, and he sort of notes that, like, early on, like, he'd never had, like, too much maybe respect for Hinata. He'd been able to see that kind of, like Naruto, she always, tried her best, but she was so timid. It was always like, he was always a little bit annoyed whenever he had to interact with her. But especially since in kind of recent times, marrying Naruto and stuff like that, he is really seen kind of like the true strength of her character begin to come out. And she just has a very like confident interaction with Sasuke in this moment, where she actually gives him like a headband, which becomes an important part of like how the kind of final sequence happens. It's not anyone's particular headband. I think it was just meant to represent sort of like, why we're doing this is for the future. There's a little bit of a through line of like one of the things that Naruto was signing off on was a new order of headbands, and I think it's meant to be like it's one of them. And so right at the end, what ends up happening is he like throws the headband out ahead, and it like, what does he do? I think he like light ignites it or something like that. It gets thrown out ahead. He then uses the swap around technique, and this is what gets Naruto and Sasuke really close to the ultra particles at the end. So it's a nice kind of little moment where kind of Hinata gave them like the final like item to get them over the line a little bit. But it's just kind of noted that like Sasuke feels a little bit almost on edge around Hinata. Like, he doesn't really know how to interact with her because she's kind of changed a reasonable amount, but is still sort of the same. But he just doesn't know how to interact around her, which is always been like a bit of an interesting kind of dynamic, that they really haven't interacted that much. So I think that's where I'm going to wrap it up now and say, like, I still maintain, like, it's a good book. There's some weird stuff with the plot at the end where, like, the actual core plot, who the villain was, is a little bit like research institute just kind of vying for, like, you know, financial power effectively by taking control of this technology. The actual end action sequence with the giant ramp up into the sky is a bit weird to visualize, and I'm not really sure it, maybe from a power level perspective, makes a ton of sense. But you could tell that, like, a lot of the plotting was actually quite good. Like, the reveal when it's like, oh yeah, the other ultra particles are in a meteorite orbiting the planet, and it's the same one that our new character knows about. That was a really clever reveal. It's just that plotting didn't really line up with, wait, how do we get to space effectively? And the best solution they had was big ramp. There was a little kind of weirdness there for me. But overall good, like, because the strength of this book is the characterization. It's how Naruto's characterized. Chihire, I actually think is quite a good new character. Those interactions were actually really good, Naruto and Chihire, over the course of the book. And just a lot of other little bits and pieces, like Orochimaru is nicely done here as well. Sasuke, Sakura, like, they do, good stuff is done here. And I feel like this book ends up being the, like, if you're maybe worried that, like, Naruto maybe feels like a too much of a side character to a certain degree in, like, Boruto, here's your chance to really get inside Naruto's mind and, like, how he as adult kind of, like, feels about the position that he's in right now. I think that's where this one really shines. And so there's some weakness with maybe some of the plot and the events that happen at the end, but the character work is strong. So there are my thoughts on this. It's a nice trilogy of books. I would recommend reading all three. I did find it weird that the adaptations, again, only did the middle book when there's so much good stuff in the first and the third book. But they're my thoughts on this. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on this novel if you've read it yourself. Otherwise, if you have any questions, let me know below. But yeah, it's going to be a while before we get back around to more Boruto content, because obviously the manga is on hiatus and the anime is on hiatus. I think we are coming back. I think the manga is going to be back in August, if I remember correctly. And then, in September, I think we have some Naruto episodes, which will probably lead into Boruto coming back probably in October. I think that's what everyone is assuming at the moment. So there probably won't be a ton of Boruto content on my channel in the upcoming weeks. But when we come back, I'll be right back with anime reviews and Boruto manga reviews as well, because I'm so excited for the post-time skip stuff to see how they do it. But anyway, let me know your thoughts on this book in the comments below. But that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.